Ah, geopolitics, the great chessboard where every move is calculated, every piece is expendable, and every leader thinks they're playing four-dimensional chess while actually running on pure opportunism. The latest strategic fever dream floating around? The idea that Russia could trade Iran for Ukraine, cutting off Tehran in exchange for a Western concession on Kyiv. On the surface it might sound ridiculous, but let's take a deep dive into why this absurd-sounding concept might actually have some theoretical merit, while still being completely unworkable in reality. At first glance it seems like Russia is too committed to both Ukraine and Iran to make such a trade, but let's entertain the idea, and imagine Putin suddenly became a cold-blooded pragmatist, willing to cut off Tehran to secure his real prize Ukraine. Here's why Russia could consider the deal. Let's be real. Ukraine has always been Putin's main objective. It's not just about territory, it's about historical identity, national security, and Moscow's ability to push NATO back. While Iran is useful as an ally, Ukraine is existential for Russia. If giving up Iran meant securing Ukraine, that's a trade worth considering from a purely strategic standpoint. Yes, Iran has been useful to Russia, providing drones, weapons, and a distraction for the United States. But Iran is also an unpredictable theocracy that operates based on ideology, not cold calculations. Tehran has its own agenda, and Moscow can't fully control it. If Iran escalates too much, say by provoking an all-out war with Israel, it could create regional chaos that disrupts oil markets too much, which would be bad even for Russia. Russia benefits from high oil prices, but if the Middle East becomes too unstable, it could lead to economic downturns worldwide, cutting demand and possibly tanking Russia's economy. If the West offered Russia a more stable long-term economic deal, like lifting some sanctions in exchange for cutting off Iran, that might be more appealing than relying on endless chaos. If Putin suddenly announced he was cutting ties with Iran and pressuring it to stop its proxy wars, it could force the US and Europe into a diplomatic dilemma. Would they reward Russia with a frozen conflict in Ukraine in exchange for a more peaceful Middle East? Would they ease sanctions? Would China take Russia less seriously if it abandoned Iran? It's a risky but interesting power move. Now, let's throw another wrench into this fantasy deal. On September 30th, 2024, Benjamin Netanyahu made a striking comment that many have overlooked. He directly addressed the Iranian people, saying they would be free sooner than people think. Sounds like standard anti-Iran rhetoric, right? But then, he doubled down, implying that a more Israel-friendly US administration, that is Trump, would create the conditions for this freedom. Translation: if Trump wins in 2024, Netanyahu expects the US to back a direct move against Iran. Whether that means more sanctions, military strikes, or even regime change efforts remains unclear. But Netanyahu was clearly signaling that if the White House flips in November 2024, Iran is in for a rough ride. This statement makes the Iran for Ukraine trade idea even less likely. Why? Because if Trump wins, Netanyahu expects full US backing against Iran anyway. That means Israel and the US would pressure Iran without needing Russia's involvement. So why would the West make a deal with Moscow if they believe they can handle Iran on their own? Instead of some grand Ukraine for Iran swap, what's actually happening is a much messier, annoyingly complex geopolitical game. 1. Russia will keep backing Iran because it helps keep the US distracted while Moscow focuses on Ukraine. 2. The US will increase pressure on Iran, especially if Trump wins, but without making deals with Russia. 3. Israel will keep hitting Iranian assets in Syria, Lebanon, and beyond, hoping to weaken Tehran without sparking a full war. 4. The West will never accept a Russian takeover of Ukraine no matter how much they might want to contain Iran. 5. Oil prices will stay volatile, benefiting Russia in the short term but creating long-term instability. The idea of trading Iran for Ukraine is an amusing diplomatic thought experiment, but in the real world, it's a non-starter. Russia has no reason to betray Iran, the West won't abandon Ukraine, and Netanyahu has already hinted that if Trump wins, the US will be far more aggressive against Iran. No Russian help needed. So instead of a neat diplomatic deal, we're stuck with a never-ending cycle of proxy wars, economic warfare, and strategic maneuvering that will keep the world on edge. Isn't great power politics fun?